Thank you for, first of all, sending me this screen over and allowing your work to be, well, not torn apart, but I wanted to dive into some details with you, and I'll try to keep it under 30 minutes because it's quite easy to explore them all in a lot of detail.
Yeah.
So as a bit of
excited.
background, as a bit of background, you said that this was a productivity suite.
Yes, correct.
And this is the inbox notifications or notifications inbox.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's some context. Probably that'll become clear as we go through it. But I'm mainly going to focus on the visual design and maybe some of the interaction design choices. But feel free if I point something out, because this has happened before. If I point something out and actually it's an oversight, feel free to point that out. You don't need to try and make up a reason if there's a mistake in here for some reason. But yeah, there's a few things I wanted to dive into if you're happy to go with it.
Yeah, cool. I'm excited. I gave you a bit of this context, but I'm an engineer by trade, and I've been slowly picking up design from mostly, coworkers I've worked with in the past, Twitter accounts and online resources like yours. So, I feel like a little bit of an imposter here, but I'm excited. I've never done like a design crit before. I've been on the other side creating actual designers work, but I haven't been in the hot seat. So I'm excited. I hope my work holds some muster and I don't completely reveal myself to be an imposter.
Great. So the first thing I'm going to start with actually is the color, because apart from the notification bells or this red one over the person's avatar, it's generally a monochrome interface. Is that intentional, or is that because you have not yet decided on colors?
Yes, that is intentional. So there are color, I'm imagining, comes two ways into this UI. So this is a work in progress. So there are some warts, but kind of the hope here is that color comes from the user and from the user's content and not from the UI Chrome itself. So right now I have these mock avatars, right? It's that's one place color will come into place, is a person's face, hopefully. I hope the content, the content here doesn't have links, but a link there would provide color. I want to add, I'm trying to work with an illustrator to get custom reactions done. So, a thumbs up, a smiley face, a lol sub emoji, something that brings some emotion. It's those reactions I also hope will add color. I also want to add a workspace color. So there is actually a workspace color, but there's nothing on the screen, which is maybe a mistake. But that workspace color should come through in different elements. So a link would use, if you're choosing to use green as your workspace color, then a link would be that green. An action button, a primary button might be that green. The done button, I chose to use a black for on the right-hand side. I felt like that was it looked nice. It was a very high contrast choice. I played around with this being a blue. I think it's because that button is so important to this UI and to moving on in the workflow. I found it useful to make it an incredibly high contrast element versus a blue sometimes faded away. I only played with it with blue. I should have tried it with other workspace colors, but anyway, I chose high contrast there. But yes, the goal is to have the user bring the color and then have the UI kind of fade into the background. But there's not real user data here, and there's not avatars, and so we have monochrome for now.
And so why, dig into that a little bit more, why did you want it to be the case that only the user provided content would add color?
Yeah, so the hope for this application, right, is I want to, so I'm building this suite because I've always been frustrated with my own tools at work, right, where I found a lot of friction in managing notifications. I found a lot of friction in finding content or helping other people. And so I'm trying to build, a set of tools that is very fluid to move through, that is very fast, that kind of dissolves out of the way. And so in that spirit of dissolving out of the way, if as much attention I can put as possible on the content, the better, right? The focus should be on the human word. The focus should be on the work that I am doing, and not on the UI Chrome, right? There shouldn't be big embellishments that distract me from the job I'm trying to perform. Yeah, this is all, again, this is all very pie in the sky. I don't know if this is actually how people think. This is real visual design justification, but this is kind of how I am trying to justify my decisions.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Generally, what I focus on first, I mean, color I started with because it really stood out to me, but generally what I focus on first is structure. And so the thing about the structure of the page that really jumps out to me is the sort of format of this section in the center. So I assume you tapped on this notification on the left, and that opens the, is it a page? Is that what you're calling it?
Yes. Yeah. Page.
Yeah. So tap on that, it opens this page in the center. I was curious about why you went with this page effect where it's got the gray background rather than having full width white content space.
Okay. So normally these, this is a post in the system. So normally these posts live in a feed. So you'll scroll through and you'll see multiple posts. There are even some versions of notifications that will group multiple of these posts together, right? It's like if you're in a channel, like a Slack channel, and there are 3 new posts, when you click on one, you can scroll through and there will be these posts that you scroll through and comments will be collapsed and you can, expand and collapse however you want. And so okay, in a feed context, I think this makes more sense, right? Where you have these, 3 kind of clearly separate units. Having the kind of the faded background is like a great way to add contrast and grouping, right? To actually see those 3 things. In the feed design, there's also like a sidebar and like some other floating elements, right? And the sidebar is not in like a white box here. So it kind of like prioritizes the content while kind of diminishing the sidebar content, and kind of the sidebar content is also floaty, right? So it's like sticks around when you scroll. It like clearly marks that like physical separation. And then coming in here, right? So it's repeating that visual pattern. So something I definitely don't want like a full width post or like full run with text in like kind of any context, right? One of my biggest gripes with Slack is that if someone sends me a long notification on my big monitor, my eyes spend so long kind of trying to scan, right? It's like, okay, definitely didn't want full width, so that's why it's short here. But then I think so this is reusing that kind of visual pattern from feed. But even in this context, I think there's some utility to this design in that all notifications, they will have kind of different content in the center here, and like sometimes different shapes and different forms, but it's all generally this like wash background with a piece of content on top. And there's been this, so there's an interaction designer I'm working with who gave me this great idea, which might make into the product or something, where the kind of completion interaction for this inbox is you scroll to the bottom, and then you scroll up, and then like maybe there's a timer that says, okay, in 3 seconds, this will go away. And then, with the kind of iOS or Mac OS over scroll effect, then when you release, the content goes up and the next piece slides in, right? It's like in that case, they're having these be kind of like physical entities on a wash background, like helps create that effect where kind of you are scrolling through cards and dismissing and going to the next one. So, we had to play around with that concept a little bit more. And so like probably the experimental concept is not a reason to fully go with this design. I think reusing the visual paradigm from feed and like having this consistent, content floating on background is nice. And also maybe give space to add a couple other things. But yeah, there you go. There's.
I'm curious. This is not really a design question, I suppose, but I'm curious. The word you're saying is wash background.
Yeah, so that's the term I'm using for this light gray background color. So this is getting a little in the weeds, but so there's also a dark mode for this product, right? And so like the dark mode, by default, it flips all the colors, but it's a little weird if you had this background color be lighter than the content, because like you want to create that feeling of depth, right? So like the background color should actually be darker than the content. So it kind of like lives outside of the default, color scheme flip. And so I give this the name wash, right, as like the name for this. And so I think that's a name I picked up at Meta. They use like a similar name for that kind of background color. Yeah.
Do you know where it comes from as a sort of the origin of the term?
I do not. Do you?
No. I'm wondering if it's architecture or something, because it rings a bell.
Yeah.
But no, I'll have to look it up because I'm always interested in new terms that come up in the design world if they're useful to describe something. Yeah. So anyway, back to the interface. I wanted to ask you. There's this. I assume this is a single item being displayed, and there wouldn't be something beneath it. I noticed there's a margin above the page or the post, but the bottom of the post, including this comment interface, is right up against the edge, the bottom edge of the screen. So I was curious about that.
Yeah. Okay. So this is also a side effect of this coming from a feed, right? So like when there are multiple of these in a row, you will like scroll down and like another thing will appear. And this is an interaction I'm kind of proud of. So the comment input sticks to the bottom until you reach the end of the post, and then it moves along with the post. So like when you have a list of these things, right? Like you're viewing, you can like leave a comment no matter where you are scrolled in the comment feed. And as you scroll down, it kind of goes away, and then you're on to the next one, and then you have the sticky comment input for that. So like you're right, it does make a little less sense here when there's one thing. There's another like notification type that's a chat, right? So like you have DMs in this product as well as these like asynchronous long form posts. And so a chat like behaves differently in that there's always one chat, and like there can be like a long amount of chat history that you don't want to scroll through in any context. So that has like a slightly different paradigm here, right? Where the scroll bar here is on the outside of the wash, whereas in the chat, the scroll bar is on the inside of the wash, and then you have that top and bottom margin, and like it's more contained in a way. And so yeah, those are different. There are sometimes I look at it and I'm like, this feels weird. Is this correct? and I think about it that way. I think reusing the visual pattern here makes sense for posts. And then I do think chats are like a meaningfully different use case where you're not going to scroll through the entire thing while reading the entity. That my direct history conversation with my manager is like way too long to do that. So I think that distinction makes sense. I think this pattern makes sense here. Once you do scroll to the bottom, you'll get your margin.
Yeah. All right. One other thing, which is a minor question, is the selected state for this notification, the third one. Did you consider any other sort of visual approaches to showing the selected comment?
Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. So it's currently using this kind of like rounded format with like a little inset from the sides. So it wasn't this way at first, right? It at first was full flush. And when I was designing this at first, I was designing it in dark mode. So in dark mode, right, like it used a lighter gray color from the background, but then again, the wash is like a darker gray color from this white. There's actually like 3 colors here in dark mode, whereas there are 2 here, the white and the light gray. Where in dark mode, you have like a black, then a slightly lighter gray, then the selected state has an even lighter gray. When I toggled to light mode and I saw it in this 3 color design, the like edge bleeding into the wash felt like it didn't like it felt like those were connected in like a weird sort of way, which I didn't like. So anyway, I put that away. I'm like, that's kind of weird. Let's come back to this later. So this UI, like this specific list of notifications, appears in another place. So it appears, if you go to the top right, there's a notification bell. So when you're not in this full screen inbox view, and I can pull up a screenshot if that's helpful, and you hover over this thing, it shows a list of your notifications in kind of like a list preview format, kind of like in a drop menu. So the drop menu, right, it has like rounded corners, it has some like padding on the top and bottom. And like my design for like that menu thing, right, is you have, thin padding for white all around the menu and then the content inside. And so when adapting notifications into that menu design, I'm like, okay, I want to do this as well, where you have the concentric border radiuses for the top and the bottom post. And then you have like that thin light margin. And so like, because I'm a weird kind of designer, I'm designing this in code. I like write this code up and then I reload the page and then I see it is applied here. I like didn't think of like separating these 2 use cases. And then I looked at it and I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting as a way of separating out the wash and the content. And like, I stare at this a little bit more. It's like, it's like a little weird to me in that you have these like little thin white ribbons on the side, and I'm trying to think of whether this is okay. But like another thing you'll notice, right, is that the between the like first two notifications, the line there doesn't extend to the edge. So I did this to make the notifications feel more like they were kind of part of one unit, right? You know, I saw the thing with like borders extending all the way, but then you have like the hard border of the header, the like hard border of the sidebar, and it just started to feel like there were a lot of borders, and where I'm using like the solid borders to delineate kind of like sections of the nav. And so that smaller, so having also like a full width border there felt like kind of strong. So narrowing it a little bit, I felt like made all the items feel like one list a little bit more and like more cohesive and like repetitions of the same idea instead of new sections. So then the selected state also having that ribbon made sense in that context to me, where I'm like, okay, I'm seeing like this little white ribbon, but like I kind of like that these items now feel again like a little more like related to each other than related to the navigation, if that makes sense. The language isn't super precise, but like I kind of liked how it grouped things a little more together within this sidebar and made things feel like more part of one whole in there. And so anyway, that's where I landed. I'm like, I'm not, this is, I think this is like what, medium confidence in design choice, but like I liked that this grouped things together within the sidebar a little more. And I especially liked how in this light mode here, the like wash didn't conflict with the selected state by having that little white ribbon. You know, this gets weird when you like select the top item, because now you have like a border radius next to a hard corner. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I feel about the white ribbon on the side, but I like this design for now. I'd love it if you have ideas to improve it. I'd love to hear it now that you have the context.
No, I think medium confidence is probably the best that 99% of designers can hope for in 99% of situations. So I thought it was the right choice when I saw it, but I'm always curious about alternatives that have been considered. So that's interesting background. I did want to talk more about borders. Before I forget, I realized I wanted to ask about the padding inside this post. How did you land on the amount of padding around this post sort of before you hit this border on the white section?
Yeah, I think that is much more of like what I am. I think this more so just kind of evolved organically, where I'm kind of in the code. I'm like playing with different numbers. But I guess like to really get in the weeds, and again, this is maybe not the right way to design, but like the first thing I built out of this entire screen is the like text editor for the content in this post, right? So I like also have a document editor in this product, and so I built that document editor first. That document editor is kind of like full white background, so I built out that text editor. It had like a little bit of padding on the left side. And so when I moved that into here, it kind of came with that padding. I'm like, this is too little, and so I added a little bit more. And that's how I landed on it. Maybe it's, you know, now that you mentioned, I'm looking at it, it feels like too little. I don't know. I'd love your thought. This is not very intentional on my part. It's just I did a thing and it looked okay, and then I moved on.
This is less padding than I would expect, or that I might put in if I was designing this screen. And I work on a similar product, so I have actually been designing screens like this. So yeah, I probably put more padding in. I don't think it's bad though. I mean, I guess generally the rule is that the outer padding should be greater than the inner padding, but in this case, the inner padding is the space between paragraphs. So I'm not sure how much that should affect, because you could put as much padding as you could put as much spacing as you wanted between each of these paragraphs, I'm assuming, since it's a text editing.
I think there's been something I've been feeling with these longer posts that I've like looked at these longer posts, and there's been something that's been off to me that I can't quite put my finger on. And like now that you bring up padding, I'm thinking maybe this is recency bias, but I'm like, maybe it's the padding, where like these long posts do feel like they run a little bit. There's like no color. I'm also, I don't know. I feel like there's something missing and off, like when I'm looking at a longer post like this, and I don't know. I might have to play. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yes, I'm jumping around a bit, but before I forget, I've got things in mind. So you mentioned these dividers that are not full width, and they're a lighter gray than the hard divider above and to the right of this sidebar. I noticed you've got the same non-full height in this case.
Yeah.
Lighter gray divider here, but there's this full width divider between these two top bars, which is not a hard gray or a darker gray. And so I'm curious about that sort of inconsistency.
Yeah, that is all right. So this is also like medium to medium low confidence in the design. So this top bar is like the only piece of like persistent navigation in the product, right? So like I'm building a product. It's got a lot of different kinds of content that go in the center here. And I'm like, okay, so I need some piece of persistent content to like anchor the user that's always going to be there. And so that's this like top header here with like the search bar and notification bell and that sort of thing. So normally that thing renders with like a hard, like by default, that thing renders with a hard border and then like a gray wash background, and then kind of stuff happens in there. But there are some screens I found like it makes sense for them to also have their own header, this being one of them, right? I found it useful to have like controls on top of like the content area and on top of the other thing. So then like so trying to figure out a design to do this like double header thing is I don't quite know what the right answer is, but yes, this is where I've landed right now, where for screens that have two headers, you have like one header and then you have the second header, and then because they are not they are like physically connected in a way that the sidebar and the content area aren't, right? Like the sidebar is its own scroll view, the content area is its own scroll view. So like if we're thinking about these as like physical entities or like sheets of paper, like they're separate like physical entities and sheets of paper, whereas the header, even though it's like different ideas, it is physically connected, if that makes sense. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to do a strong divider, which feels more like a section divider. So instead I use the light divider. And then I think like the first place I use this is on a different screen where like I wasn't using the like, you know, kind of scooched in pattern for these kind of light gray dividers. And so I mostly reuse this design from that screen. But I think it makes sense here too. I have considered, you know, scooching in the borders a little bit, but I think it makes sense here in that while it's not separating kind of like different physical sections of the product, like they are pretty separate ideas. And so like a full width border kind of made sense to me. But like to me, like the thing that bothers me more in this design is kind of like the layout of things. I mean, I can show you the other screen that has this design, but in that screen, so we have the full width border and we have like a centered piece of content. And then we have like a header for that centered piece of content. Like we have, again, the header all the way on the left and then kind of like a header kind of in the center. And that just looks all kinds of off to me. And I don't know if it's because I need more stuff in the header or if I like need to move stuff around. Like this also feels a little weird to me where I think I use different typography here. I think the inbox, the name of inbox is a little larger. I can't quite remember. They're looking kind of similar. I played with like many different forms of this. But even this, it's like having that double header is like a little weird. And even if I think inbox is bigger, but they're very similar weights, regardless of whether or not it's bigger. And like putting an inbox next to icon and then right aligning it with the title feels, so also I want users to be able to white label that top left corner. So like Cyberworld is like the dumb test name that I'm using. So like I want a user to be able to put their company logo there, but also like a company to like put their word mark there, right? So like, you know, the you know, Netflix logo is like the end, but the Netflix word mark is like the end plus the word Netflix with a little, you know, swoop under it, right? So if a company is putting their word mark there, then I can't align anything to anything, right? And that's a little bit weird. So, and also the margin on that inbox header is this also like kind of, I had to play around with a while and I still don't quite like, but it matches the margin of the like logo header there and the logo image, but it doesn't match the margin of the content underneath. So like it feels to me, sometimes it feels to me too small. Like weirdly, when I have this like full screen like next to the edge of my computer, it feels better. I don't know why, but when I have like, you know, if I open an Arc and like Arc has its sidebar, then it feels too small. I don't know why. Anyway, anyway, that's, you asked about the divider and I gave you a whole bunch of other things I didn't like.
No, it's fascinating how much thought or how many compromises go into something as simple as a line. You know, it's there's a lot affecting the choices you can or want to make here. So I'm glad I asked. I'm trying to keep this video relatively short, so I'm going to ask one more question, and that's about this set of what I assume are avatars and the 10 comments signifier. You've right aligned it all rather than left aligning it all. I'm curious about that choice.
Yeah, that's because I want to put something to the left here. So I want to put like a reactions module to the left here. So that's, you know, there's just something missing.
And so why reactions on the left and not reactions on the right? I assume that the comment stuff came first, but yeah, why those sides for those things?
Yeah, that's how Facebook does it. You know, it's not a great reason, but maybe if I'm trying to like think through more like why it is that way, like the first thing you probably want to do, the primary action you probably want to do in responding to a post is reacting, and then the secondary is commenting, and like also there's kind of like an ease of interaction kind of question there, right? Where you know, like a thumbs up is much easier than like writing a thoughtful comment. So if I'm trying to like pick apart why it is that way, that's why. But yeah.
All right then. I'm going to stop it there. Thank you, Caleb, for, like I say, allowing me to dive deep on some of these details. I hope it was enjoyable for you, just like it was for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. And yeah, thank you for putting out content. I'm kind of lost. I used to, you know, again, I used to work somewhere with exceptional designers that I was able to learn from, and now I'm like working mostly on my own. I like don't have that same mentorship, isn't quite the right word because I was an engineer, not a designer, but I don't have that same I got no one to talk with this stuff about, and I'm worried that my skills aren't going to grow, right, or they're going to atrophy, or like I'm doing the wrong things because I don't have that same feedback. So this was good, and I appreciate your content, and it helps me feel like I'm staying sharp.
Thank you, and as far as I can tell, you're doing the right things. So keep it up.
Yay.